Hi, and welcome to the Dynamic Duel Podcast, a weekly show where we review superhero films and debate the superiority between Marvel and DC by comparing their characters in stat-based battle simulations. I'm Marvelous Joe.
And I'm his twin brother, Johnny DC.
And in this episode, we will be reviewing the newly released in-theaters film, The New Mutants. Yes, the movie finally came out. The curse is over, although maybe not so much because a lot of theaters still aren't open and a lot of people aren't actually seeing the movie.
Even a lot of critics aren't.
If you're wondering whether or not you should go out and see this film in a theater, if it's worth it to do that, ultimately, I think if you like these characters, then it's probably worth it for you to go see this movie in theaters. Though legally, I won't advise you to do anything. But, if you're not a fan of these characters and you're not too excited to see the movie, I would say wait for it to come out on digital.
It all depends on whether or not people are, willing to sit with a mask on their face for a few hours.
Yeah, we'll talk all about the movie later on in this episode. Before that, we're going to go over the comic book movie news from this past week, of which we're just going to discuss one news item, and that is the unfortunate passing of Chadwick Boseman due to colon cancer. Really sad news, and we'll be talking about him and his legacy and the response to his passing.
As always, we list our segment times in our episode description, so feel free to check out the show notes if you want to skip ahead to a particular topic.
And just a reminder, guys, to please subscribe to the show if you haven't already. If you have, please help us grow our podcast audience by giving us a rating or a review on whatever platform you're listening to us on, or by sharing us with your fellow DC and Marvel fans. But with that out of the way,
quick to the No Prize. So a No Prize is an award that Marvel used to give out up until the 90s to fans. Our version, the Dynamic Duel No Prize, is a digital award that we post on social media that I personally draw for those who we feel gave the best answer to our question of the week.
And last week's question was in regards to the DC fandom event and all the DC related news that we got from the exclusive digital convention. We wanted to know, if Marvel had an exclusive digital convention like the DC fandom, what would it be called? And what would it be like? And we got a lot of salty-ass answers.
Yeah, we did.
For this particular question. You guys were trolling hardcore on each other with this. I loved it.
Yeah, Marvel fans were either really bitter at how good the DC fandom was, or DC fans just really want to stick it to Marvel.
Yeah, we got a lot of great answers here. We'll go through the honorable mentions and name the winner. My first honorable mention goes to Andrew Freeman, who said that the Marvel event would be called Marvel Mania, and it would make DC look like a joke as usual.
The heck?
And then he has a message for all DC fans where he says, enjoy this attention while you have it. Marvel will be back stronger than ever.
Oh, I will enjoy it. I'm enjoying the heck out of it.
And it wasn't the most descriptive answer, but I really did like Andrew's energy on that one. So kudos on that, and that's why you get the honorable mention.
My first honorable mention goes to Jeff Miles Jr., who said that the Marvel event should be called the Marvel Dumb. It wouldn't be as good because Marvel has reached their prime and can't top Endgame, unlike DC, who has a lot of potential and can still reach their peak.
Honestly, I worry about that. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, wondering if Marvel has reached their peak, if they will ever be able to top the greatness that was Endgame.
I think they may have. Just, with like Iron Man and Captain America leaving. But since they got the X-Men characters from Fox, I don't think we need to worry about that.
Just knowing that is what helps me go back to sleep. My second honorable mention goes to John Starosky, who said that he would call the event Marvel's 2020 Stark Expo, because it keeps it fluid and enticing while holding on to its own marvelous style. I really like the name of that event because it calls back to the Stark Expos that were featured in Captain America the First Avenger and Iron Man 2. It just sets up a really good theme that I think would be fun and exciting for all Marvel fans.
Yeah, as long as you got 2020 out of the title, because that would just curse the hell out of it.
Yeah, probably.
My second honorable mention goes to Calvin Mims, who said that the Marvel event should be called the Why Even Try Dome.
Ugh.
And they would release information that no one cares about because DC fandom was so amazing and Marvel sucks booty. And I have to agree. And Joseph's at a loss for words.
I wanted to say Marvel doesn't suck booty, they kick booty, but I wasn't sure if that would, work.
It works.
It's the best I got, honestly. My final honorable mention goes to Dustin Balcom, whose title for the event I didn't love, but I did love his description. He called it the Marvel Runner-Up event, but the convention would have a tribute to Stan Lee, and it would be full of movie and casting announcements. And instead of one hall, they would take you around Marvel locations such as the Helicarrier, the Baxter Building, and the X-Mansion.
And of course, the DC fandom was supposed to be pretty similar to that, like these virtual islands that you could just visit. But in the end, it just ended up being like a streaming video.
I wonder why they chose the island theme for the DC fandom, though.
No idea. That's how Jim Lee designed it. My final honorable mention goes to Ken Johnson, who just posted a picture of a dumpster fire and said, "Nuff said." I loved that. Although, Nuff said actually wouldn't be the worst title for a Marvel virtual convention.
It would certainly be better than, Marvel's dumpster fire. Before we list the winner of this week's No Prize, we want to give a quick shout out to Michael Haggerty, Sana Farumand, John Speas, Jeremy Orr, Isaiah Bethune, Nightwing Superman, Joshua Smith, Nate West, Joel Seagrave, and Caleb Albers for their answers. Thank you guys very much for reaching out to us. We appreciate it. But the winner of this week's No Prize goes to Nathaniel Wagner, who said that the event should be called the Merry Marvel March, and it would bring back the Merry Marvel Marching Society, and they could even include the old song or revamp it. And I liked this answer because in my head, I kept trying to do what I think a lot of people were doing, trying to find an equivalent of a fan dome. I was like the fan cube or something like that. You guys were obviously a lot more creative than I was. But Nathaniel Wagner presented his event as much more of like a celebration by having it be a march, which I thought was actually a pretty damn cool idea, especially since it ties into the historic Merry Marvel Marching Society, which was the name of the fan club for Marvel back in the day. And their song was cool. It was like, the Merry Marvel Marching Society. It was very similar to the Star Spangled Man tune that was in the Captain America the First Avenger movie. I would just love to bring back all that nostalgia and all that greatness from like Marvel's Silver Age that would be tied into the modern Marvel movie and comic book announcements.
I also hope that Marvel would call it the Merry Marvel March, because then all the DC fans can make fun of the Marvel guys.
You don't even know. You don't know your history.
I don't actually. I didn't know what the Merry Marvel March
book.
was. Thanks for explaining that.
Oh, you're welcome. Always happy to explain things to a DC fan. But congrats again to Nathaniel Wagner for winning this week's No Prize. If you, the listener, want a shot at winning your own No Prize, stay tuned to later on this episode when we'll be asking another question of the week. And now that that's done,
on to the news.
With a heavy heart, I'm absolutely devastated to say that the actor who portrayed Black Panther in the MCU, Chadwick Boseman, passed away on Friday, August 28th, due to a bout with colon cancer, which he had been diagnosed with 4 years ago. So for pretty much the entire time that we've known him in the MCU, since his debut as the character in Captain America Civil War, he's had this illness, which was absolutely shocking news. It feels like it came out of nowhere.
It totally did. I was looking at the superhero news on Friday night, and I had to do a double take when I saw Chadwick Boseman's name. Obviously, none of us had any idea that he was suffering from colon cancer. And for him to die at such a young age, he was only 43, it's a tragedy that just cuts you to the core.
Yep. Not only was he just a shining star for the MCU's future, the actor just seemed like such a genuine guy from all the interviews and behind the scenes footage that I've seen of him. Now, obviously, I didn't know him personally. I'm sure a lot of the listeners out there didn't know him personally, but if you had seen any of his press material, any of the interviews that he conducted for Black Panther or for the Avengers movies alongside his MCU co-stars, you could tell that he really loved to laugh, that the message of these films was really important to him, and that the fan community and the Black community held a special place in his heart. I was actually out of town this past weekend. I was up camping at a location where I didn't have service, and it was raining, so I ended up leaving with my friends, and we headed into town where I first got service again. And the first thing that I saw when I got onto Facebook was this news that Chadwick had died, and I couldn't believe it. It was undeniably sad, but I didn't really find myself tearing up until I saw all of his co-star tributes to him. It was the Robert Downey Jr. one that showed a picture of them having a laugh together, and his caption said something like, leveling the playing field while fighting for his life. And I teared up a little bit. It just really got to me, and I don't think I felt like this about a celebrity death in a really long time.
Yeah, probably in that sense, Heath Ledger.
I think the most poignant remarks about him were from Ryan Coogler, who was the director of Black Panther. I won't read his whole statement, but I want to touch on the last part of his letter, where Ryan wrote, Chad deeply valued his privacy, and I wasn't privy to the details of his illness. After his family released their statement, I realized that he was living with his illness the entire time I knew him. Because he was a caretaker, a leader, and a man of faith, dignity, and pride, he shielded his collaborators from his suffering. He lived a beautiful life, and he made great art. Day after day, year after year, that was who he was. He was an epic firework display. I will tell tales about being there for some of the brilliant sparks till the end of my days. What an incredible mark he's left for us. I haven't grieved a loss this acute before. I spent the last year preparing, imagining, and writing words for him to say that we weren't destined to see. In African cultures, we often refer to loved ones that have passed on as ancestors. Sometimes you are genetically related, sometimes you are not. I had the privilege of directing scenes of Chad's character T'Challa communicating with the ancestors of Wakanda. We were in Atlanta, in an abandoned warehouse with blue screens and massive movie lights, but Chad's performance made it feel real. I think it was because from the time that I met him, the ancestors spoke through him. It's no secret to me now how he was able to skillfully portray some of our most notable ones. I had no doubt that he would live on and continue to bless us with more, but it is with a heavy heart and sense of deep gratitude to have ever been in his presence that I have to reckon with the fact that Chad is an ancestor now. And I know that he will watch over us until we meet again. I thought that was really, really heartfelt and touching. Of course, Ryan Coogler referenced Chadwick Boseman's amazing run of films where he played such icons as Jackie Robinson in the movie 42, he played James Brown on Get On Up, and he played Thurgood Marshall in the movie Marshall. You know, he played all these iconic figures and was truly blessed with an extraordinary career, one that'll leave a lasting legacy.
His final tweet, the tweet that announced his passing on his Twitter account, is actually now the most liked tweet in the history of Twitter.
Wow, that's an amazing testament to just how many people he affected.
Yeah, and it's an amazing tribute, I think, to such a wonderful actor. You know, King T'Challa. He deserves it.
Wakanda forever. He will be missed. And this news brings us to our question of the week. What Marvel or DC actor's death affected you the most? What did the actor mean to you personally?
You can post your answer to our Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or email us at dynamicduelpodcast@gmail.com. We'll pick our favorite answer and draw that person a Dynamic Duel No Prize that we'll post to social media.
But that does it for the news for this episode. Let's go ahead and get into the main event where we talk all about the new film, The New Mutants. All right, New Mutants finally in theaters after all this time. The film was originally set to be released on April 13th, 2018, and it was delayed 4 times before finally getting to the big screen.
Was it worth the wait?
Yes, somewhat. I think it was a pretty damn decent film. I was mostly really excited to be back in theaters again, even though I was paranoid nearly the whole time that this was going to be the death of me because I was going to catch COVID. But the first time I saw the film, it was in IMAX, and I was one of not even 15 people in that theater. And, you know, it's an IMAX theater, so the auditorium is massive. Initially, I was wearing an N95 mask, but because I felt like I was spread out enough from other people and that the auditorium was so big that I wouldn't get a whole lot of recycled air, I switched to my regular cloth mask in the middle of the screening. The second time I saw the film was at Regal Cinema's 4D cinema screen, where the chairs would shake and they would like shoot water and wind at you and stuff.
Right.
That opening scene, that was intense. I was like holding on for dear life in my seat because it was shaking a lot. I thought I was going to get sick and they kept throwing wind and water at me. It was nuts.
Crazy.
But that theater was pretty spread out as well. I didn't have anybody sitting next to me. And again, there was only about 20 people in that showing.
Yeah, I got to my showing a little bit late. I actually couldn't see how many people were there, but they had like 4 seats between each group of people. I wasn't worried at all.
Yeah, and for mine, they were only seating every other row. So it seemed generally safe. Obviously, I couldn't speak for everybody. Depending on where you live, I may or may not even take that risk. But as I said, the movie wasn't bad. It wasn't great.
It was exactly what I expected it to be. I wasn't looking forward to this movie when it was first announced, but I think just because it kept getting delayed and it developed this mystique around it, like, what is this film? And then the marketing for it was pretty cool. I definitely got excited for it. Going into the film, hearing that it wasn't getting the best of reviews, I wouldn't say my expectations were high at all, but I walked out of the film, perfectly satisfied with it.
I think the film is suffering from the Fox X-Men kind of bias that a lot of critics seem to have. It certainly applied to the movie Dark Phoenix, which got horrible reviews and was certainly undeserving of all the hate.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was a perfectly decent film, just like this one was. Before you listen any further, decide for yourself if you want to continue listening, because this will be a spoiler review. If you're going to wait for this movie to be released on digital, go ahead and skip this episode until you actually get around to seeing it.
Yeah, there's a lot of mystery in this film, so you definitely don't want to spoil it for yourself if you do plan on watching it.
The appeal primarily lies in its characters. The New Mutants comics were an often overlooked corner of the X-Men universe, but the stories of Professor X's next generation of students were often just as compelling as their more popular, more adult contemporaries. Their adventures were often a bit smaller in scale and a bit darker, largely due to Bill Sienkiewicz, who provided the series artwork, starting with issue number 18's The Demon Bear Saga. His stylish, almost abstract artwork is often quite haunting to look at, so I can see why the writer and director of this film, Josh Boone, approached this story from a horror angle.
And for me, it was just the right amount of horror, because if you listen to our podcast for a while, I'm not a big horror fan at all. I wouldn't say this was really even a horror film. It was definitely chilling, but the frights were minimal.
It had some creepy moments, but overall, I wouldn't classify it as scary in any way. If you're not a fan of horror films, I don't think you're going to have a miserable time in this movie. If you are a fan of horror, I think at least you'll be able to appreciate the nods to other teen horror films that this movie kind of references. But there haven't been too many Marvel or DC films that could be categorized as horror. There were the Blade and Ghost Rider films, which had horror elements, and the Man-Thing film that debuted on the Sci-Fi Channel, and of course there was Constantine. But teen horror is a subgenre that has never before really crossed over with superhero films, and that alone is kind of exciting because some of the most well-known horror films when I grew up in the 80s and 90s were teen horror.
Yeah, like Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th.
Yeah, Scream, Final Destination, they were all teen horror, and it's a fascinating subgenre because it analogizes the fear and insecurity faced by people in their formative years with the fear of the supernatural. And the X-Men comics themselves created a metaphor about the unease of adolescence through the tales of these characters with powers that would manifest during puberty, and how traumatic or tragic that could be. In concept, I love the pairing of teen horror with the world of X-Men. It just makes so much sense to me, and I'm glad we got to see this movie experiment play out before the entire mutant franchise will be rebooted in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Especially with these characters, if you saw someone like Iceman or Cyclops, back when they were in their teens in the X-Men dealing with horror themes, they may not seem as well suited for the genre as these characters are.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But yeah, again, I love the concept of this film. The execution, however, I would say I just merely liked. Again, it's not a bad film, it's not an amazing film. Despite the movie having a remarkable cast and an interesting premise, it does fall short in a few areas. First and foremost, the movie is very, very small scale, lacking a lot of the action, settings, and stakes of most other superhero movies. 99% of it takes place in one setting. There's only 6 people that show up on the screen if you don't count the Illusions or Danny's father. And all the characters are inexperienced with their mutant abilities, so you don't get a great idea of the scope of their powers. It's like the opposite of the X-Men films, where if a movie like X2 is a 5-course meal, then the New Mutants is more like a hearty soup. It's satiating, but I also want my goddamn dessert.
Yeah, it is like an appetizer. You're absolutely right. We mentioned in our last episode where we reviewed Deathstroke, Knights and Dragons, how cheap it was for them to produce. And I imagine a large part of the appeal of making this film by Fox was its budget.
Yeah, because of the small scale, it was likely very affordable for the studio to make this film. It almost seems like the kind of movie that would do much better on a streaming service than in theaters. This would be huge on a streaming service like Netflix or Hulu. It's not a film that necessarily needs to be seen on the big screen, unless you just have a huge investment in these characters.
I think this property probably would have been tailor-made for a Hulu television series, because it's so low budget and so character-focused. Besides
the small scale, I would also describe the film's story as somewhat incomplete. The movie tries to play itself off as mysterious in some regards, such as the hospital itself and the specific nature of the characters' abilities and histories. The fact that the movie gives fewer answers than we have questions might just be because this was supposed to be the first film in a new trilogy that will never be made. So we'll never know why the Essex Corporation chose to staff this hospital with only one doctor. We'll never know explicitly why Magic never teleported out of solitary confinement. We'll never know when exactly this film takes place in the larger X-Men continuity. All we'll have are best guesses and assumptions, and that could be a little frustrating. To me, it seemed like there were quite a few holes in the story, maybe a few scenes that were cut for time, but I'll definitely be interested in seeing what's available on the special features when this movie gets released on digital.
Yeah, I remember hearing that there were going to be a ton of reshoots planned for this film. That never happened. And director Josh Boone said that the version that we're getting in theaters is his original version. But I still feel like there was quite a bit that changed because there were some scenes in the trailers that were either tweaked or we never saw in the film. Scenes like people pressing up against the wall.
Yeah, and that was one of the posters for the film too.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, there was some stuff that was cut. It didn't make the movie hard to follow. At times I was just wondering how one scene led to another because there didn't seem to be any sort of transition in the story. Even though the movie could be called lacking, it still manages to keep the viewer's interest through its coming-of-age tropes. We're introduced to 5 very different characters. You could say cliched characters and you wouldn't be wrong, because you have the anxious new girl, the soft-spoken religious girl, the mean goth girl, the horny rich jock, and the poor country boy. We see how they relate and clash, then bond, and ultimately fight for and protect one another. It's heartwarming in a Breakfast Club sort of way, but the movie is also kind of creepy in a Nightmare on Elm Street kind of way, and it's also a little kick-ass in a low-budget X-Men kind of way. Because of all this mixing and matching, it's a unique film. It's novel, and I appreciate it for that. And I think I appreciate the film more than I actually like it. But hey, it still gets respect.
I definitely appreciate the film. I appreciate what filmmakers can still do with the superhero genre and stories and characters from the comics.
Yeah, I want to see more genre experiments like this. But since the best thing about this movie is its character development, let's go ahead and talk about the characters. Let's start off with Danielle Moonstar, aka Mirage, who is played by Blue Hunt. Now, this movie was the actress Blue Hunt's first full-length feature film, and she was the lead character. And you know what? I think she did a great job. She was entirely believable and charismatic as a girl who's learning who she is while simultaneously learning what she can do, which I think is fascinating.
I had no idea this was her first film. She totally held her own against the rest of the cast, most of whom are fan favorites from other genre work.
Yeah, she definitely still stood out, and I think she has a bright career ahead of her. This movie raises the question of, if your power was to manifest the worst fears of people around you and you didn't know it, how could you ever have any sort of relationship with others? It seems that not knowing oneself ultimately can be the most frightening thing of all.
I loved the reveal that the bear was hunting her because she was afraid of it. You know, the opening line of the movie explains how her father told her that there are 2 bears within everyone kind of fighting for our souls, and that the demon bear fed off of your negative emotion. For her to sort of psychically manifest this creature and have it destroy her reservation was a really powerful and good angle, I think, to take for a character who is a teenager, who is sort of afraid of the unknown and adulthood and what they will become.
Yeah, absolutely. The marketing for this film kept pushing the bogus plot of these mutants that were trapped in this haunted hospital. But we X-Men fans knew better because we know Mirage's powers in the comics are that she can create illusions of people's fears, and later she was able to project their desires, and even later create anything from their memory. But interestingly, the movie makes it apparent early on that she is responsible for everyone's waking nightmares, and never even tried to present the hospital as haunted, which I liked. The fact that we knew that Danny was the cause when no one else in the movie knew added this tragic, dramatic irony to the story. Let's move on to Rain Sinclair, aka Wolfsbane, who was played by Maisie Williams. Now, I've never seen Maisie in anything outside of Game of Thrones, but she also did great in this film. Rain is a completely different character than Arya Stark, so she has solid range. The character was a guiding force in this movie, really introducing Danny and the audience to the setting and other players, and also guiding much of the story through her actions, such as attacking Dr. Reyes, recognizing what the Demon Bear was, and by forming a close relationship with Danny. In the comics, Rain was also raised with a strict Catholic upbringing, who was initially self-loathing due to her fear that her werewolfism meant that she was cursed by the devil. The idea presented in this film that she was also a burgeoning lesbian or bisexual, it was fascinating and actually made sense for the character. I think they could have explored that a little bit more for character development, how she reconciled her relationship with her strict religious code, but ultimately, I thought her relationship with Danny was cute. It was a riff off of their close relationship in the comics, where Danny and Rain shared a telepathic link because one of Danny's powers is to communicate with animals. And I think blending that closeness with the taboo-ness of Rain's Catholicism added an interesting romantic subplot with a hint of drama.
Yeah, the two characters had really good chemistry. Like from the get-go, when Rain saved Danny from jumping off the clock tower, you could tell from that moment that they were going to be really close.
Yeah, I like that line that Rain had at the end of that day where she was like, I could be wrong, maybe we both should have jumped. It was a little bit of dark humor, but just the way they were kind of playing off each other, it was just kind of adorable. I wish that they would have established within this movie that they had some kind of telepathic link like in the comics and that Danny had the ability to communicate with animals. Because I think that would have made the end scene a little bit more clear too when she tells the demon bear to stop. Even though the bear is not, a real bear, a real animal. It just could have been a callback to that type of communication.
I think I could understand why they didn't do it. I think they were able to successfully adapt that element of her into the story without necessarily giving her that ability because it really wasn't required for this story.
That's true. And really, Danny's powers were supposed to be somewhat of a mystery. You're right. Let's move on to Ileana Rasputin, aka Magic, who is played by Anya Taylor-Joy. Now, I love Anya Taylor-Joy. I think she's a really good actress who is really good in films I've seen her in, like Witch and Split. But I have to say, I think this was my least favorite performance of hers.
I thought from the trailers that she was just going to steal every scene she was in, and she really didn't.
She ended up kind of being like the biggest question mark for me in this film in terms of how I felt about her. Because she was just so bitchy in the beginning and pretty racist.
Right.
And just unlikable. I didn't want to dislike Ileana because she's probably my favorite character out of the New Mutants from the comics. Through the course of this film, though, she became more sympathetic and redeemable, but it was a rough go in the beginning, I'm not gonna lie. Apparently, her attitude was like a defense mechanism stemming from her childhood as like what appears to be a child sex slave, which, what?
That was awful.
Where did that come from? Like, that certainly was never in the comics. Her brother, Colossus, was very protective of her and would never have let that happen. Her past was kind of a loaded insinuation that the movie never addressed outright, probably because this was a PG-13 movie and they can't dive too much into sex slavery. But the fact that the story didn't really take time to acknowledge it made things feel kind of awkward and vague. Like, who were these ambiguous smiling men? Did they really look like that, or was that how Ileana perceived them?
Now, she said that they wore those masks that always made them smile, and always made them
really?
cry. Yeah. And when I say that that was awful, I don't want to say that I thought that was bad for the character. I meant that that angle of her character was heartbreaking.
Yeah, but I mean, considering that that was never in the comics, I wish that they didn't go this route, or at least say that she was never assaulted because she was always able to teleport away, or better yet, have her traumatic history stem from the time that she was kidnapped into limbo by Belasco, who was this demon that taught her how to be a sorceress. That would have been out there, maybe, for the film, but it would have been truer to the comics, and it would have been certainly less horrible.
I can understand how it wasn't faithful to the comics, but as someone who really isn't too familiar with her character, I thought it was kind of ballsy and kind of inspiring for them to address this kind of subject matter and sort of have her deal and grow with that. Because all of these characters are broken. All of these characters have these, kind of horrible histories.
Yeah, but I can't forgive what that means for Colossus. It's almost like they're ignoring the fact that Magic and Colossus are brother and sister.
Yeah, they probably are ignoring it.
And I hate that. Now, in the comics, Magic's primary ability is to teleport through these portals that she could create to the dimension of Limbo, which is this magical dimension outside of time and space. She knows quite a bit of magic, which she most often uses to manifest this eldritch armor and her soul sword, which is composed of a piece of her soul.
I didn't realize that the armor was magic. I always thought that she kind of had a power similar to her brother and that she could just kind of like create like metal skin for herself.
No, it's magic armor, and it's a magic sword. In the comic books, she's now the ruler of Limbo, but Limbo itself in this movie was very weird because she said that it was her happy place that her and Lockheed used to go to when they felt afraid. So I have a few questions about that. Like, one, why the fuck is Limbo your happy place? Because it looks crazy as hell.
It looks like hell.
Yeah. And two, are they insinuating that her mutant powers in this movie is the power of, like, imagination to create whatever world she wants and whatever creatures she wants to exist in it?
I didn't get that impression at all. I got the impression that she didn't know what the place was. She just knew that it was a place to escape to that was free from men who would do horrible things to her. I just think that's her not fully understanding what her ability is. They're all still new mutants.
Mm-hmm.
As for Lockheed, I got the impression that because he turned out to be real at the end, that was like a creature she met there when she was a little girl. I imagine probably because her abilities manifested so much earlier than everyone else's. And that was just like her friend in this other world that she sometimes visited, that she kind of got comfort from.
So what came first? Lockheed the real dragon or Lockheed the puppet?
I think Lockheed the dragon.
See, it was vague though. When I saw it, I thought that she had manifested a friend in Limbo that resembled her favorite puppet as a kid. Your way makes more sense, but the fact that we are even raising this question is an issue.
It could be. I mean, it's fun to talk about. It's fun to explore different interpretations.
I prefer clear-cut answers. I thought it was interesting how they made Lockheed Ileana's pet in this movie, and he was a creature of Limbo as opposed to being an alien from outer space that Kitty Pryde found.
I like this more.
Yeah, I think this fits a whole lot more. Considering that Kitty Pryde never went to space in the X-Men movies, I think it was just a little bit out there to have this alien dragon come and fight alongside the team. To have this magic-ish dragon fight alongside Ileana feels so much better. It is cool that we eventually did get to see Lockheed in live action in this film. Although honestly, I wish we got even more of him.
I wish we got a lot more of their powers in general.
Yeah. Let's move on to Roberto da Costa, aka Sunspot, who's played by Henry Zaga. Now, I've never seen Henry Zaga in anything before, but I thought his character was cool in this movie. A bit of a douche in the beginning, like Ileana, but he redeems himself and also becomes pretty sympathetic when you learn about his history and how he accidentally killed his girlfriend, Juliana.
I love the way that the film kind of takes like these cliche stereotypes, like he's the rich horny jock, and turns it on his head. In the Truth or Dare game, you know, he wants to be this guy who's been with all these women, but we learn that the self that he projects is not his true self. And that's sort of the coming of age aspect of this film. Becoming not the version who you think others want you to be, but actually yourself.
Yeah, that's particularly true of him and Ileana. They both put up such walls that just get torn down through their maturation. I really liked how they didn't make him as much of a Human Torch character like they did in the X-Men Days of Future Past film. If you listen to our Duel episode where we pit him in a fight against DC's Starfire, you know that Roberto's ability is photosynthesis. He absorbs light and converts it into strength. And eventually he did gain the power to expel his solar energy in the form of heat, but he's always been more of a strong man than a blasty guy. When his powers are activated in the comics, he's portrayed as dark as a shadow because he's absorbing all of the ambient light within and around him, but here he looked more like obsidian rock or something.
Yeah.
I really want to see his shadow form because I think that's such a cool concept, but this was a step in the right direction at least.
I figured that in the end battle, when he was, you know, like picking up massive church pews and swinging it around like a bat and just like punching the demon bear, that you would be pretty happy with this interpretation as compared to like Days of Future Past's Sunspot.
Yeah.
I did think it was cool that the way they had him turn into like his dark form was just like he burned himself so much that he got charred or something like that. It was a nice interpretation.
Not as nice as a living shadow, but again, at least he was covered in black. Let's move on to Sam Guthrie, aka Cannonball, played by Charlie Heaton. Now, I've seen Charlie Heaton in Stranger Things, and he was one of my favorite characters in that show. I'm a fan of his, and I think he did well here, creating this tragic character who wasn't given a choice in life and was sincerely sorry for the deaths he accidentally caused. I kind of pitied him and his injuries he'd keep getting because he couldn't fully control his blast field yet. But his powers looked really cool here. They were put on great display. Just this buildup of kinetic energy coursing through his body, threatening to blast out like a powder keg. The scene where he was struggling with his powers while looking in the mirror, and he blast punched himself in the face to knock himself out so he wouldn't explode in the bathroom. It was just crushing. I felt so sad.
Yeah, that was a great character moment. He's such a good actor.
Yeah. I liked his growth in the movie, though, where he was forced to use his powers in defense and then to fight the demon bear, saying, "Gotta get better sometime." It was uplifting, and he knocked out one of the demon bear's fangs. That was cool.
He also just caused those like smiley face guys to just explode. That was cool.
In the comics, Sam came from a farming family, but he was forced to work in the Kentucky coal mines. In the comics, it was a lot less tragic because there was a cave-in and he was able to use his powers to blast out of it and save his friend who was working in the mines with him. But in this movie, he was the cause of the cave-in and it killed a lot of other people. The movie just took a much more tragic turn with a lot of these characters. Finally, let's talk about Dr. Cecilia Reyes, who was played by Alice Braga.
I thought Alice Braga did a really good job with this performance. You know, you really kind of latched onto her in the beginning as someone who was like a caring figure who cared about these kids and wanted to help them. I also did think it was strange that she was the only doctor at the facility.
Yeah, that made no sense.
But she definitely seemed capable of handling everyone on her own.
Yeah, especially with the use of her force field powers.
Yeah.
Now, she was the biggest surprise in the movie for me, because I read the issues of X-Men in the 90s when they introduced characters like her and Maggot and Marrow, and I found Cecilia to be rather bland. But then in one of the trailers for this film, they showed that the New Mutants were trapped at the hospital because of this force field, and I was like, okay, that's why they chose Cecilia, because she could create force fields, even though in the comics, she could only manifest a force field around herself. But then, hold on to your hats, it turned out that not only did they choose her because she's a doctor, not only did they choose this character because of her force field powers, but since the character is Hispanic, Puerto Rican of African descent, but still Hispanic, they could tie her into the Mexico Transigen facility from the movie Logan that created mutants, including X-23.
Yeah, I was really surprised when I saw footage from Logan pop up in the movie. I was like, what? I've seen that before.
I'm so angry with myself that I never put that together before in the film, and I'm sure a lot of people did. It was so obvious, tying Transigen in with the end credits scene of X-Men Apocalypse, where we see the Essex Corporation take Wolverine's DNA. It was such a cool surprise how that all fit together, tying together elements from the comics and the X-Men movie canon. It makes sense now that the rumored reshoots that Fox wanted the director to make incorporated the actress Daphne Keane as X-23 and Antonio Banderas as Mr. Sinister. I would have loved to have seen that, and it's such a shame that Nathaniel Essex will have been referenced in 3 separate X-Men films and yet never shown, because Mr. Sinister is one of the X-Men's greatest villains.
I think that would have been good for a sequel. Like, I would have loved to have seen X-23 pop up in a sequel and team up to take on Mr. Sinister. This film, I think, was good as is. I think there was enough of a conflict with all the horror elements that were going on and an antagonist in Cecilia Reyes when she went bad that you didn't need to toss in another villain like Mr. Sinister.
Yeah, but we're not going to get any sequels, so...
Well, I'm a DC fan. I don't really care about that. Like, I'm happy with this film the way it is. I think it was really smart to make it as intimate as it was.
No, we should have had Mr. Sinister. I don't care if it was a tease that ultimately went nowhere. At least we would have got to have seen him in live action. Although, you know, they may be saving him for the MCU. Who knows? Now that we've gone over all the characters, let's get into the story highlights. The movie opens with the legends of the 2 bears, and we see the destruction of Danny's reservation as she and her father flee into the woods away from this wild force. It ends up killing her father pretty much in front of her eyes, and Danny flees this force before tripping and hitting her head.
Now, they released a clip of this opening scene earlier, and I totally thought that, you know, it was an edited clip. Like, there was something missing right before her father died in front of her. But no, that clip was exactly the same cut that they used in the film. You've mentioned that you felt like things were missing. Was that one of the scenes?
Yeah, that was definitely one of those scenes. Danny wakes up in the hospital where she's told by Dr. Cecilia Reyes that everyone in her reservation has died and that Danny is a mutant and that she has to learn what her powers are and learn how to control them in order to leave the facility and return back to society, or rather to her superior's facility for gifted mutants.
Which I totally thought was the Xavier Institute.
And so did the kids. Yeah, they totally thought they were going to be X-Men, which was kind of sad when they learned that they were just being evaluated for Essex Corporation for use as killers. Denny goes to group therapy where she meets the other New Mutants that are also confined to the facility, all of whom have, in one way or another, killed another person through the use of their abilities. Magic takes Danny outside, and Danny learns that they are sealed within this hospital through a dome force field encapsulating the entire building.
Man, Ileana was such a vivitch in this scene.
Just like that movie she was in, Vivitch. Danny, realizing that she's trapped and has lost everything that she's ever had, considers suicide by jumping off of the hospital's clock tower. She gets rescued by Wolfsbane, who convinces her to give the place a try and shows her around the facility. That night, when everybody goes to sleep, Cannonball gets a vision of the mine that he used to work in with his father and all of the dead miners that he accidentally killed by causing the cave-in. Ileana continues to antagonize Danny, and the two get into a fight that lands them in solitary, where Danny has a vision that it's snowing blood, and she ends up just drenched in blood from head to toe.
It was a very Carrie-esque moment.
Yeah. Dr. Reyes runs some more tests on her, as Rain hears voices from the pastor that she killed calling her a witch, as she's giving confession in the chapel. The kids sneak up to the attic later on that night, where they perform polygraph tests on each other as kind of a truth or dare kind of game, and Danny explains the legend of the two bears.
Yeah, and it was pretty sinister when we, the audience, learned that even the place in the attic where they thought that they were free from all prying eyes, they really weren't.
Right, yeah, they were still being monitored.
That's when I really started to feel like something was wrong with Cecilia Reyes. Like she wasn't like a good person who was helping the kids.
The mutants bond over this interaction, and they further bond after drugging Dr. Reyes and then throwing their own celebrations, where Rain takes Danny out into the cemetery outside, and they watch rain from the sky fall onto the force field dome.
That actually was pretty beautiful to see that.
Yeah, how it was like illuminating everything around them in orange light.
And I also set up the fact that Rain could get anywhere in the hospital through the duct system.
Right. While this is going on, Roberta goes to take a swim with Ileana, and she turns into this burnt corpse that attacks him. It turns out that Ileana actually wasn't there and that he just had a nightmare vision of her, calling back to his guilt that he had accidentally killed his girlfriend by burning her.
And that almost had like the poltergeist kind of vibe to it.
Yeah, with the skeleton.
Yeah.
More tests are run on Danny as Rain is attacked and branded by the Reverend that she had killed earlier for branding her before.
And I love how, like, the W stood for witch, but upside down, it was, like, for mutant.
Yeah.
That was cool.
Ileana deduces that Danny is the cause of their visions, and Essex Corporation gives Dr. Reyes permission to terminate Danny.
And that was a surprise. I didn't actually think she was going to go through with it, because I, at this point, still thought she was mostly good.
Yeah.
But that definitely turned out not to be the case. She was more loyal to the Essex Corporation than she was to her patients.
Yeah.
Dr. Reyes, I thought, was just a really well-written character.
And as she was euthanizing Danny, Rain jumps in and rescues Danny, scratches the fuck out of Dr. Reyes' face.
Seriously, like, she almost lost an eye.
That was intense, just seeing those nails dig into her cheek skin. Ugh.
Yeah.
Ugh.
It was also cool just to see Rain, like, not fully in wolf form, but, like, in werewolf mode, kind of. Half human, half wolf.
Yeah. While this is happening, Ileana, Sam, and Roberto are attacked by the Smiley Men. They all end up fighting back, including Ileana, who's hesitant at first, but then pulls out her soul sword and starts attacking them like a badass. I especially like when she was teleporting up and down the steps, just hacking them into pieces.
Yeah, except when she, like, attacked people, you could see shots of Limbo just, like, flash on the screen. It was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I have no idea what that meant, but it was a cool effect. After defeating the Smiley Men, the kids confront Dr. Reyes, who encapsulates them in force fields and starts crushing them, telling them that Danny must die because they realize that her power is to manifest people's darkest fears until they die. But right at that moment, the demon bear, who's been hunting her from the start of the movie, breaches the outer dome and smashes through the building and chomps down on Dr. Reyes, which I thought was a pretty dang brutal scene, actually.
It was definitely brutal. And it was also kind of smart in the way they transitioned antagonists. Because for most of the movie, they didn't know who the antagonist was. And then they learned Dr. Reyes was bad. But the film wasn't over when she died. They just had to encounter an even more powerful villain at the very end for the final fight.
Yeah, and the fight against the Demon Bear, I thought, was pretty dang cool. Because we get to see Lockheed in action. We got to see Magic in action again using her portals. We got to see Cannonball in action. And even Sunspot steps up to the plate when Sam tells him to nut up, which I thought was funny.
Yeah, that was funny. Like, that was the catalyst that got him to, like, fully embrace his power.
It was cool to see them all fight alongside each other and stand up for each other. I thought Wolfsbane was kind of a badass, jumping up onto the bear's face and like scratching the shit out of him like she did Dr. Reyes. Eventually, she's put into life-threatening peril, and Danny has a vision of her father telling her that she's bigger than her fears, and Danny ends up confronting her fear, quite literally, subduing it and getting it to disappear and save her friends.
It was a little anticlimactic because they like didn't beat the thing into submission.
Yeah.
But it worked.
There was an awkward moment where she told the demon bear no, like you would a misbehaving dog. But I really did like the image of her walking up to it and like touching its nose, being just up so close and personal to this demon bear face. With the hospital destroyed, the New Mutants grab what belongings they have and decide to leave the facility together.
And that was the end of the film. There was no like post-credits scene or mid-credits scene or anything like that.
Nope, it was truly the end of the franchise. I did learn during the course of the credits, though, that the person that did the voice for the Smiley Men was Marilyn Manson. So that was pretty cool.
What?
Yeah. It was interesting because he'd performed a cover of the song Cry Little Sister from the Lost Boys soundtrack for this movie, and it's an amazing cover, and that wasn't included anywhere in the movie, not even during the end credits.
Yeah, I figured that's where it was going to end up, but nope. I wonder if Marilyn Manson is like a fan of the New Mutants comics or something like that.
That wouldn't surprise me at all. But yeah, that does it for this film. Overall, again, I really appreciate the movie for the choices that it made in terms of the genre and how it tied into the larger X-Men universe. How it had decent action, decent horror, and decent coming-of-age elements. It's really unlike any other comic book movie out there. And even though the execution wasn't perfect, I still think it was pretty good and deserves 3.5 stars.
I don't think that this film is deserving of all the hate that it's getting. I think it'll age pretty well.
I think ultimately, at the end of the day, this will be like the cult film of the X-Men franchise.
Absolutely, yeah. But I agree. I think 3.5 stars is a fair rating.
But that does it for this review, guys. Let us know what you thought about the New Mutants by writing to us at dynamicduelpodcast@gmail.com or by visiting us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. You can find links to all of our accounts by visiting our website, dynamicduel.com.
And on our site, you can find a link to our Patreon page where we offer bonus content, including blooper reels, which we just put up a new blooper episode today, as well as breakdowns of non-Marvel and DC duels.
Yeah, we just got done figuring out who would win in a fight between Solid Snake and Sam Fisher from Metal Gear Solid and Splinter Cell, respectively.
We also did US Agent versus Red Guardian.
And Spawn versus Hellboy. That was a lot of fun. Check those battles out again by visiting us at patreon.com/dynamicduel.
On our main website, dynamicduel.com, you'll find a link to our merch store where we sell t-shirts, hoodies, stickers, and more with our Dynamic Duel No Price artwork. This week, you'll be able to find artwork with magic on it.
That'll be cool. I can't wait for that. She always looks like a badass.
And this, of course, will tie in to not only this episode, but our next one, where we're going to pit magic against Deadman.
Yeah, that may surprise a lot of people, but, we're huge fans of Deadman. We've been trying to get him into a duel episode for a while now, but couldn't figure out who to pit him against. And ultimately, we decided magic would be a good duel because, essentially, they could both hurt each other.
Yeah, she's one of the few people who can hurt Deadman, and see him too.
So look forward to that next week. We want to remind everyone again to please subscribe to our show if you haven't already, or please leave a rating or a review on your platform of choice. Sharing the show on social media or in person is also a big help for us.
But that does it for this episode. We want to give a big thanks to our executive producers, Ken Johnson, Jace Crump, and John Speas for helping make this podcast possible. We'll talk to you guys next week. Up, and away.
True believers.
Hey, toy fans, join us each week for the Toy Lines Podcast,
where we discuss toys, collecting, and entertainment news with your hosts,
Tom Romero
and Ian Westhoff. The Toy Lines Podcast. Some assembly required, batteries not included.
Find us on Podbean and wherever you listen to podcasts.